Grant looked out at the horizon. The Taras was coming. He could see the bulky shell approaching. The walls of the town shook with every step the monster took. It was like an earthquake. Gods, he wished this was an earthquake. That would be so much easier. The mercenary shifted about nervously. He wasn't the kind of person you expect to see at a time like this. Nor would you expect Kurt to be helping. There was no coins for either of them. I guess there are a few things where everyone comes together. This was one of those. Though he didn't want to be here. He wanted to evacuate the town. But of course, there were those who wouldn't leave their homes. Mostly those who were young and stupid. Those, and a few who were too old to be of real help, but wouldn't leave the kids to die. Somehow, these idiots convinced Grant, Kurt, and Julia to help them out. Not that Julia was much help. She was passed out in an empty inn. And Kurt was off trying to get them reinforcements. Grant looked over his broad shoulders for the aid, but it wasn't there. Ah, perfect. The rumble was deafening. He could smell the Tarask's rancid breath. Drawing his sword, he stood still. Of course, this was pointless. His sword was massive against humans, chimeras, and even usable on a cyclops, but this? Ha! It was just for show, and to calm his nerves. Grant was practically jumping in his skin. It could be fear, or it could be the shock waves as the Tarask reached their first defensive line. It wasn't much, but they were able to level the ground with metal spikes made from broken farming tools. The Tarask didn't even notice. It just kept going forward into their second line. The village alchemist had collected as many of his more combative toxins. Small cuts from the farming tools left them openings in the Tarask's feet. It stopped for a moment. That was all the poisons achieved. Some numbness in the Tarask's feet. Nothing. With a mighty roar, the Tarask planted its foot onto the village's outer wall. Grant replied with his own howl. The act fortified his courage as he swung his blade at the monster's toe. Welcome back to Mythical Phylogeny, fellow adventurers. I'm your guide, Jason. I know this is a different topic, but hear me out. The environment that you live in influences many things. Just look at how different bird species build nests. Some, like burrowing owls, go underground, while others have cliff swallows and their mud nests, or ducks with their grassy nests on the ground. That's just birds. It gets even more complex when you introduce insects, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. Ooh, frogs. They go insane on this topic. So let's take a look at how a fantasy world would shape a village. Dragons, trolls, basilisks, goblins, kobolds, chimeras. The list goes on and on. There are whole encyclopedias of monsters which can lurk in the shadows of these worlds. With monsters comes dangers. Not just for you, brave adventurer, but for the villages you meet on your voyages. So we need to protect them. The main issue here is how dangerous is the world. If this world where most dangerous thing you'll meet is a flower, then you don't need any defenses. But what if it is a world where dragons roar in the sky, and the ground is ripped asunder every day? Well, in that case, you'll need incredible defenses. Okay, what are those? What is available to build with? Well, the first thing we need to look at is the ecosystem you try to settle in. There are a few things you'll need: a water source, a food source, protection from the elements, and a place to live. A water source comes from a river or a lake. Oceans aren't a great option due to them being filled with salt water, which will dehydrate and kill you to drink. This can also be a danger in some deserts. There are deserts which have a high salt content in their soil that will end up in the water supplies. Now, there are two additional ways to get water. If it is salt water, an alchemist can remove the salt just like a modern day chemist, or you can do it via magic. Both of these will let you drink salt water. In addition, magic that makes water or brings the rain will open up desert environments. With enough casters, you can even turn a desert into fertile farmland, but that will depend on the soil composition. Next, I mentioned a food source. This could be crops or monster meat. You can find crops that can be grown in nearly any environment, so that isn't too bad, so long as it isn't frozen wastelands like the Antarctic. But even the largest desert in the world, the Sahara, you can grow crops such as alfalfa, grains, and some root vegetables. So your job is just picking the right one. That becomes easier with magic. Just look back at my farming discussion a couple weeks ago. With magic, even Antarctica could be farmable. Monster meat is a little more complicated. To eat an animal, it needs to be dead. You could play the scavenger, that will limit you. And no matter what, sooner or later you'll need to fight off an attacker. If you are relying on being attacked to gather meat, then it will be an inconsistent resource that you can't count on. But that's where you adventurers come in. You are the brave individual who leaves the safety of the village to go out and hunt the beasts which plague your village. Ah yes, you are a key component to the survival of the village, and keeping everyone fed. That does bring up another factor, protection from monsters. Just like elemental protection, you need to keep the monsters away from your village. Come now, if you are a giant predator looking for an easy meal, wouldn't you consider going to a village and filling your belly? It would be nice and easy, if the village isn't defended. So what can we do to protect the village from monster attacks? What is your first thought? A wall? Not a bad choice. But what kind of wall? Wait, you thought all walls were the same? Nope. Not all walls are created evenly. Some are even better. Your first thought is the traditional castle fortress of Europe, correct? Those walls are built with an open area inside. There's also a problem. There's nothing but air behind the wall. What is stopping something from crashing into the wall like a battering ram, or knocking down, or a giant that throws a boulder into it? Castle walls can be breached with even enough muscle or magic, both of which you'll find here. So what can we do to stop the wall from being breached? Not having a wall. Japanese fortresses are built differently. They would build the wall against an earthen platform, pack dirt behind the wall. This means that the inside of the wall is raised up, but more importantly, you have a much harder time breaching that wall. Well, unless our monster can climb, in which case both walls would fail. Okay, what if we don't build walls? Let's look at our dwarven friends and their legendary underground empires. They're turning a mine into a sprawling city. Calling their home a mine is an insult to their engineering skills. Sure, having the mine in your city does streamline production, but also limits attacks. The Native Americans actually tried something similar at Mesa Verde. It was a cliffside dwelling that was abandoned and recolonized before being sieged by other tribes up until about the 13th century. A real pain to get into since you had to rock climb into it. In order to breach the dwarfs or the cliff city, you'll need to either take the gates or dig in. Digging will be a threat regardless of how you build a city, and limited in how to stop it. But our problem here is what happens once something gets into the city. How do you get it out? Do you? Where are you when the town is attacked? That is a big factor. In the day, you'll be working at the shops, clinics, restaurants, and whatnot. You can react and go right to action, but at night, you'll be asleep and defenseless. So I put the living quarters in the inner circle of the wall and a commercial district on the outside. This would hold true for any settlement. There's one more thing. At the heart of your village, you can place a strong fortress. This could be a fortified temple or a city vault of sorts. Actually, there is a way to prevent your city from being dug under. Don't build it on the ground. Flying cities. Oh, fun here. This will work similar for cities that are floating on the ocean. This changes everything, and not for the better. A flying city would attract dragons and other flying predators. And those don't care about walls. Nope, they just swoop down and demolish your town. So town layouts in the sky, huh? You'll want your residential district near the core of the city. Hide them under skyscrapers that prevent large predators from getting down to the houses. A nice little hidey hole. Of course, a flying city can be dropped just as easily as a bird city can collapse. Of course, a sky city and an ocean city will have the same issues. Cliffside and tree-built villages would be similar to the underground and underwater fortresses to an extent. So, you can build on land, sea, cliff, tree, underground, and in the sky. Where else? Oh, I've got another one. Probably the most dangerous and the safest at the same time. Okay, hear me out. What if we build a village on the back of a giant monster? There is no end to stories of giant sea turtles with islands on their back. Oh, and then there are dozens of terrestrial creatures that do the same. Think about it. You've got a living defense for your village. If you're attacked, you've got something that can defend itself while you reinforce it from above with archers. This isn't perfect. First off, a big creature will eat a lot. That means it will take a large chomp out of your farming. Then, well, your village may wander off, and who knows where it will end up. Having a living home, well, something may try to eat your home. Lastly, sooner or later, your home will die by old age or a predator. Then what do? You're homeless. Again, I mentioned protection from the environment. What that means is keeping extreme heat and cold out of your home. Underground homes are easy, but it's something that even primitive animals and humans mastered, so I won't cover in much detail here. Okay, we've got a village. Now, how to protect it? Stag defenses like walls are nice, but they aren't perfect. How often was the Great Wall of China breached? No matter how good your defenses are, they have limits. One option is traps and mounted weapons and whatnot. Ultimately, you will need a crew. Trained forces that can do the job. Adventurers can fill the role, but not all villages will have them on duty. Least of all at all times. So, if you can't hire a full-time security team, you could arm your population. Now, when attacked, what do? All go and defend, or choose those to attack and those to retreat? This is an important topic. More people on the attack doesn't guarantee a higher survival rate. You want to organize units in drills before the attack. Then you'll need designated survivors. Who can you lose? This is not an easy topic. You'll need to protect your healers and key artisans, which can be blacksmiths, carpenters, and tailors. Those who make what you need to do a job. Anyone can cook, but not well. Still, food is food. Usually. After that, you've got to have enough farmers. But you might be able to have others pick up double duty. Lastly, you got warriors. Those who you will lose. Yeah. It's an ugly topic, but we need to talk about it. The Taras stepped down on the wall, turning it to dust. Fire! The man yelled. The village carpenters and blacksmiths had been busy. Very busy. Amazing what they can do when desperate. Their hammers and saws went all day. Perched atop the shop was the fruit of their work. A massive ballista was ready. A bolt the size of a tree shot out. It sounded like a falling boulder as it struck the Tarrasque in the shoulder. The beast roared. Its claw came up and slammed down onto the shop. Its shadow warning the two men to escape long before it attacked. Jumping onto a building, Grant ran up to the giant, swinging his blade down. He drove it into the leg, which jerked upward as the monster spasmed in surprise. Sudden movement threw the hired muscle to the ground, weaponless. The Taras turned to the man as his mind struggled to find itself. Opening its mouth wide, it let out a foul-smelling green gas. Grant barely had time to jump to his feet and flee around the corner. Corrosive air chewed on the exposed wood and mortar. Grant jumped forward as a shadow crept over his head. A moment later, a giant claw came crashing down on the building that was his hiding spot. Grant looked up as the Taras glared down at him. No sword, no trick to save him. He was... A flock of shadows darted above the mercenary. It was a movement's warning. A dozen heavy metal shafts fell from the sky and pierced the Tarasque's neck. With a great roar, the monster fell to the ground. Houses and shops crushed under its bulk, but it was down. That was all that mattered. Sighing, Grant dropped to the ground. It was over. He had survived. Thank you for watching, fellow adventurers. I know this is a different topic, but it is important to understand it when we are looking at the biology of some creatures that loom on the horizon. Please return next week, Well, I want to look at redundant organ systems. Not something found in any particular species, but occurs in many works of science fiction and some fantasy. Until then, safe travels.